Me defending a game for once? Man, this year is just so fucking weird. Now, I know this is sort of coming out of nowhere, and it's a bit more disconnected from what I normally cover on this channel, but I recently played The Last of Us Part 2, and I really enjoyed it. So color me surprised when I hop online and see that the discourse for this game has been that a lot of people just despise it, and after seeing that, I was baffled. After thinking it over for myself, I figured I should just write down what I thought to potentially help clear up a muddy discussion about a game that I believe has the potential to really stir up the pot and create a major influence for video games moving forward. Because right now I think the discussion surrounding this game is depressingly shallow. People are getting mad over this blind, reactionary response to one or two decisions from the writers, and it's overshadowing many brilliant narrative and gameplay decisions made in this title. Ultimately, I believe that the discourse surrounding this game is poor, because people need to understand the difference between a story that they don't like the events of, and a story that is bad. Now, I liked The Last of Us when I played it back in 2018. In fact, I loved it, and I thought it had a pretty good story with amazing characters. But I also think that it hasn't aged the best. With the oversaturation of post-apocalypse, zombie outbreak games, The Last of Us has kind of fallen to the wayside. That's not to say that the game is bad by any means, it's just that the setup for its plot and the themes it displays are very standard for its genre. You have a small girl who's immune to a virus that turns people into infected zombie-like creatures, and a grown man who treks across the country to bring her to a place where her immunity could potentially create a vaccine. It's really not that special. What made The Last of Us stand apart from its contemporaries was definitely its characters, which is why so many people hate Part 2, but we'll get to that later. But for the most part, the story of the first Last of Us has kind of been told time and time again. In a zombie apocalypse, it turns out the real monsters are the people. The main setup for the plot has been done before, but I really can't knock it all too much because it's hard not to love the dynamic between Joel and Ellie in most moments. Naughty Dog's approach to these characters truly elevated that game beyond it just being another zombie game. With all that said, I didn't care at all for the game's story up until the end, really, where Joel makes a decision that speaks to an age-old philosophical utilitarian theme. Would you sacrifice one life that's close to you in order to save millions? He murders a hospital full of doctors and militiamen in order to save a girl who reminds him of his daughter because he's too terrified to let her die too. I love the rather striking and uncertain tone that the game had left itself on, and it had me really excited for the future of the series. That's why I'm convinced that everyone who's complaining about the events in this game really weren't paying attention to the end of the last game at all. Also, before we get into any big discussions about this game, I want to get into two things, two little bits of context to kind of help you guys understand where I'm coming from with this. So first, I actually really just avoided all press, all trailers, all the marketing leading toward this game. I kind of intentionally kept myself in the dark, and I'm sure that's going to impact, or I'm sure that had impacted my view on the final product compared to other people. I'm not going to say that I'm a fan or I hate having my expectations subverted, but I will say that, I've experienced a lot of stories in my time, and even if there are elements of shock factor and shock value in a game, I do believe that if they're done well, and if the writing is solid, and if something that can be perceived as deceit is done with an intent by the writer, that I can learn to appreciate it. Secondly, I've expressed this in many of my reviews, but if you're new to this channel, I'm going to explain this now. Objectivism, when it comes to criticizing media, does not exist. Anyone who says, "I'm being objective," is dumb. Everything that we experience is based on context, and the context is filtered through the lens of the critic. What I experience, what I talk about, the things that I value in this game are very different from what another person may value, from how anyone may value or may look at something like this. Which is why I'm hoping to give you guys a new lens to kind of see what I feel about this title. With that said, let's talk about it. Now, this is where I'm going to talk about people's complaints about this game, and that's something that I'm still fully wondering about myself. But from what I've gathered, there are 3 big reasons that people are mad at this game, 2 of which I'll barely acknowledge because they're really non-issues. The first is the fact that Ellie is gay in this game, which my response is, did you even play Left Behind? Like, come on. The second is that they included a transgendered boy as a character in the game. My response? No shit. I'm not at all surprised that they included commentary about current social discussions in their modern-day fictional zombie game. Also, I think the inclusion of this character is tactfully and tastefully implemented. So yeah. The final and most important thing that's getting the internet into a frenzy is the death of Joel at the hands of Abby. I suppose most people are upset because they like Joel as a character. They didn't want to see him die and ultimately felt like Naughty Dog lied to them about the role he'd play in the game. In short, my response to that is that anyone who's upset by this is missing the point. The same goes for all the people who don't like seeing Ellie do gruesome, villainous, and brutal things throughout the game. This game is designed to make the player feel uncomfortable and to subvert your expectations. For all intents and purposes, The Last of Us Part 2 is a horror game, but not in a conventional sense. It's a horror game in the sense that it's constantly throwing humanity at its lowest to us, and instead of rewarding the characters or the players for the numerous acts of senseless violence they commit, the game is punishing them for it every step of the way. Now, that approach to storytelling isn't for everyone. I understand that. Some people didn't sign up for an emotional wreck of a plot where we question nearly every action of the characters we're attached to. Beyond that, even if they let Joel live in the first few hours, the question really stands, where could Naughty Dog really take his character from here? He's lived a full life, his story's already been told. This story is obviously about Ellie and her development. Now, I'm not saying that they had to kill Joel, but I feel like it would be pretty hard to justify a sequel without having a giant story motivator like someone killing off one of your main characters. One of the things I want to bring up, and some of the audio here is going to sound a little weird just because I'm recording this off the cuff, separate from the script, that one of the things that I've been hearing very often about this game is that people don't like the way that Joel had died. They say it felt really out of character and it didn't make sense for him, and that they really just kind of forced it in, and I fully disagree with that sentiment. I fully disagree with that idea, with that statement. The main complaint is that people don't understand why Joel would be in a room with a bunch of random people that he's never seen before when he's like a battle-hardened veteran, and he would actively give them his name, and he would, let his guard down so easily in a situation like this. First, I think that it's touching irony that he did that, considering he spent the entirety of the last game kind of telling Ellie the opposite, to keep her guard up all of the time and to not trust anyone. Second, it makes sense because think about how many years that Joel has kind of been living in security inside of Jackson without really having to worry about any of this. I'm sure a big part of this has to do with his kind of regaining of his sense of empathy and innocence through his journey with Ellie that has kind of let him put his guard down significantly. He has changed as a character. It's very obvious that he has. And he's created a lot of blind spots because of that. This is a good example of seeing that his character would develop from someone who doesn't trust anyone into a person who becomes a little too trusting. Plus, once again, I think that his death is done very well. I think that there is a situation, and it could be very well said, that maybe they should have introduced some of Abby's flashbacks and her character before killing off Joel. It maybe would have made a little more sense in context, that way people wouldn't have just been so mad that he dies within the first 2 hours of the game. But I think that, again, it was done very effectively, and it was a means of keeping a mystery looming over our heads, even though myself and a lot of others, I imagine, already kind of knew where the story was going to be heading anyway. I can also empathize with people who are just upset because they liked Joel. I think his death was a masterful way to keep me engaged with the story in the first few hours, and was fitting with how melancholy the series has been up until this point. Plus, I'm just a sucker for when a death of a character in a game is done well. But I can also understand people who claim that Joel is their favorite character. I'd probably be initially pissed if they killed my favorite character off in the first few hours of gameplay in any game. I understand, but anyone who honestly thinks that Joel dying makes this game bad also needs to understand that there is a difference between not liking a plot because it makes you feel bad or it's not what you wanted, and not liking a plot because it is bad. This game is competently made and has a rather striking and well-told narrative, and if you're willing to put your pitchforks down and hear me out, I hope to explain why. If I had to describe this game in a simple sense, I would say it's kind of like Macbeth, but with zombies. It's really only like Macbeth in the sense that nearly all of our heroes die or lose everything as a result of the actions of our main characters. This game is a modern-day tragedy, and I think that it executes its themes and somber story in a fantastic way. For the most part. There are some seriously cringe-worthy moments that I just can't stand.
I'll be coming for you, okay? Take on me.
But I'd say there are more hits than misses. Throughout the game, we see the person who we perceive as the hero of the story, Ellie, develop into an anti-hero whose blind desire for vengeance leads to the deaths and harm of those closest to her. Inversely, we also see a character that we initially perceive as the villain, Abby, to slowly develop into a more heroic figure through a sort of rite of redemption. One of the things that this game does strikingly well is its ability to convey to the player that our two main protagonists, Ellie and Abby, are both polar opposites of each other while also being reflective of each of their character. They're both the same, but they're both coming from two different places. Where Abby is going is where Ellie is coming from, and vice versa. And that's shown to us through all of the little details throughout the game, and it's something that's subtle, but also kind of thrown in your face very obviously, but, wouldn't be something that you'd see initially. It's something you'd have to dig deeper into the characters' personalities about. Great examples include, this game opens up with Ellie showing us her getting over her once crippling fear of drowning and swimming. Her growth as a character in this aspect gets so heavy-handed at the end that she's literally swimming through rapids, currents during a thunderstorm, and is unfazed by it. Versus Abby, who we're introduced to with a crippling fear of heights that she never seems to get over. With Abby's story, it starts off as a tale of blind, senseless revenge, and then turns into a story where she learns the value of all the lives that she's taken, kind of reconnects with her lost innocence. Versus Ellie's story, which is the exact opposite. She starts, especially in The Last of Us Part 1, as a character who's innocent and who it's very difficult for her to try to take a life. In this game, she becomes so desensitized that she's able to just mow down people without thinking about it. These two characters operate as opposite sides of each other. Abby starts off as a mindless killer and becomes a kind of reconnected human being once again, whereas Ellie goes through the exact opposite situation. The protagonist-antagonist dynamic is flipped on its head. This game tests you as a consumer of media and will constantly challenge what you expect a protagonist to do. Ellie does some horrible things that we obviously know are bad, but are made worse once you get context. She kills countless amounts of people on a quest for revenge against those who killed Joel. She kills a dog. She tortures a woman who's slowly turning into an infected right in front of her. She even kills a pregnant woman. Those things are bad enough, but what makes her murders even more difficult to process is the context you get behind these characters when playing as Abby. You interact with them, they each have their own personalities and quickly become more than just nameless NPCs or villains. They become characters, protagonists with ambitions, goals, and complex lives. The revelation of this quickly unravels the main theme that has been present in both of the Last of Us titles so far, that these characters, much like any human being in times of desperation, will act in their own best interests to protect, avenge, and defend those closest to them. Each of our characters holds one central character trait. They are all selfish, but we as the player are getting a view into all of their psyches and motives. Our main characters kill hundreds in order to avenge those around them, creating a nearly endless cycle of violence and death. They, much like the average player of a violence-filled game, have forgotten the value of life that is not close to theirs. Joel kills Abby's father to protect a life that's close to his. Abby kills Joel to avenge her father. Ellie and Tommy kill in order to avenge Joel. Ellie and Dina even justify the deaths of hundreds of innocent wolves who had nothing to do with Joel's death purely by their association to the killer. These characters forget the value of life, and by the end, Ellie learns that the countless lives she's taken led her to become a monster. I truly hope that this game pushes the Overton window for the discussion of violence in video games, but considering what the current discussion surrounding this game is like, I highly doubt it will have that impact. This game can get seriously fucking intense, guys, so much that there are some scenes that I'm too afraid to show because I think YouTube will block this video if I do. But I think this is one of the few games in existence that uses its depictions of violence and combat effectively and knows how to properly balance its story and gameplay. I don't know about you guys, but I have gotten sick of these games that just use hyper-exaggerated violence as a means to an end. It's why I can't stand playing games like Call of Duty, Assassin's Creed, and even Naughty Dog's own series, Uncharted, anymore. I just find it frustrating that games force you to have some suspension of belief when the main character is mowing down countless people, yet it has little or no impact on their personality in any way after the fact. When Nathan Drake kills an outpost full of guards and is cracking jokes with Sully 30 minutes later, it kinda leaves me with this disconnect that takes me out of the narrative. At that point, the gameplay doesn't exist to help immerse me in the world or understand the characters, it's just a way to put dopamine into my brain and make me feel like I accomplished something. Killing people in this game is meant to turn this glorified violence on its head and make it so that you feel uncomfortable with how many troops you mow down. That's helped by the AI, who shout out the names of their fallen comrades as they die. They act differently based on any scenario, scream in pain after they're mortally wounded, and even beg for their lives when they're left on the ground. Each NPC is uniquely named, and I'm positive that the dozens of wolves you gun down as Ellie are the same characters that you interact with as Abby. This game gets gruesome, and with each person that Ellie murders in her twisted vision of revenge, it deepens her lust for blood and causes her character to become desensitized to the violence she causes. This leads to her committing literal acts of inhumane torture and murdering in the most heinous ways. I want to add that we haven't reached the Uncanny Valley in graphics yet, and I feel like that would have really helped the narrative on violence that this game pushes. I can just imagine seeing a realistic, human-like face and kind of genuinely feeling unsettled when we're forced to kill someone who just looks like any normal person. The thing I'd say I love the most about this game is how it lulls you into a false sense of security constantly. Just when you think our characters are safe, bam, one of them gets shot in the face. Just when you think you're about to set up camp and have a character bonding moment, bam, a trip mine blows up your horse. Even in gameplay, there were several moments where I was assured I was safe, but was quickly caught off guard by something. Like this example in the apartments with the deserters. The game places these notes about people who have fled the wolves and made a base in an apartment. When you enter through the front door, you trigger a noise trap, which is odd. The game then places a workbench on the second floor, and up until this point, a workbench has indicated a safe point for you to stock up and organize. But when you use it here, you get ambushed. Another example of the game putting me in a false sense of security is that throughout the whole game, I was expecting that they'd stick me in a vent with a clicker. It's one of those things that you're always afraid a game will do, but it never does. Near the end, they actually did it, and I kinda shit my pants because I didn't expect it. With all that said, despite all that I love about what this game does, it's definitely not perfect. There are definitely some very glaring issues. First of all, there are serious sequencing issues in the plot. A major aspect of storytelling in this game is that its backstory is primarily told as flashbacks, and a good number of them happen at really questionable times. Like the one with Dina and Ellie at the party, that really didn't need to happen that late in the game. Some of these flashbacks seem to only exist to remind players of events that transpire, and it kind of feels insulting, like Naughty Dog knows a majority of their audience have the attention span of squirrels, and won't remember things that happened at the beginning of the game or what our characters say early on. This game is also a bit problematic in how it tells its story as well. You play the entire beginning of the game as Ellie, traversing through Seattle, looking for Abby and anyone else who would kill Joel. Inversely, the majority of the second portion of the game is you playing as Abby, experiencing a whole new plot that's happening adjacent to Ellie's. And I think this is a big reason why so many people hate Abby as a character and never wanted to open up to understanding her plight to begin with. Many people seem to hate Abby purely as a reactionary response to her killing Joel, and don't really look at her motives beyond the surface of her actions. It definitely would have helped if we experienced Abby's side of the story much sooner so we can empathize with her character more. It also would have allowed Ellie's killing of many of the characters she bonds with to mean a lot more in the moment. If the game started with you experiencing day one in Seattle as Ellie, going to a flashback, and then experiencing day one as Abby, it would have been much more effective in building the characters than segmenting their stories like it does. Just imagine you spent the whole portion of the game bonding with Owen and Mel, and then right after you watch Ellie shoot and kill both of them. It would have been a shit ton more impactful than killing them first and then learning about them after. If you ask me, I think they should have started the game with the first flashback we get as Abby, to give us more time to understand her character. Hell, I even think that starting the game in Seattle as Abby would have been better than how they spread that throughout the game. The second thing that I think the game does poorly is its pacing. This game did not need to be like 25 hours. You could have cut a number of flashbacks in areas and the game would have done better without it. Like, we didn't need to go to the aquarium with Owen twice in flashbacks, we only needed to really do it once. Some of the Joel and Ellie flashbacks could have been condensed too, like the one where you fight the bloater. It could have either been put early in the game or just scrapped. Finally, the ending is also a bit rough, but not in the way that you may believe I'd critique it. I actually love the events that transpire in the final moments of the game. Ellie not getting revenge and instead learning to forgive Abby just as Abby did for Ellie in Seattle is brilliant, and Ellie returning home to learn that she's lost everything: her family, her friends, her ability to play guitar, the exact thing that she feared the most, is the most poignant and fitting end to a game that I have seen in forever. The thing that made this ending a bit of a mess is the major time skip after Seattle, and the fact that Naughty Dog felt the need to introduce this whole new faction of slave marauders in an area that wasn't necessary. It kind of felt like they were just trying to pad out the last few moments of the game. Time skips in games are rarely ever good, and Ellie going back to kill Abby about a whole year later, and Abby being incarcerated in a slave camp for 2 months, feels super rushed, especially since it's cramped in the last 3 hours of gameplay. There are some seriously lazy attempts at story threading near the end here that only serve the purpose to have our main character learn a lesson, and I feel like it could have been better told and more easily condensed by just keeping everything in Seattle. Ultimately, I think this game does a number of fantastic things that I think can become majorly impactful and influential to video games moving forward. I hope it can raise the bar for developers and get them to ask how we can have gameplay better serve the narrative. The main reason why I believe the extreme violence that this game portrays works so well is because it fits perfectly and complements the tragic nature of its plot. The last thing I want to leave this video on is a comment to those who are still mad at the game and are somehow watching this. These characters, their actions, and the story being told, honestly, they're not yours to tell. I feel that over the years, choice-driven games have kind of given a number of players this illusion of entitlement to the characters and stories that other people work hard to create. Largely, I think this is just due to the interactive nature of games overall, but this is a perfect moment to see how that entitlement manifests itself. The reason that I say this is simple. I urge you to look past the surface-level actions that are getting you riled up, so you can hopefully try to discover some of the things that you can appreciate in this title's gameplay, story, and commentary. So, yeah, I really liked The Last of Us Part 2. Pretty good, you should probably play it.